You're listening to the HUD Podcast, the official podcast for the Hudsonian newspaper at Hudson Valley Community College. An HVCC podcast for the students, by the students. Your news now. Get ready to enter. Hey everybody, what's going on? Welcome back to the HUD, the official podcast for the Hudsonian newspaper at Hudson Valley Community College. Election day is coming up soon, and for many students at HVCC, this will be their first time voting. This election is unique, however. Unlike in past years, there are now more ways for you to vote. Joining us today to give us more information, we have Professor Robert Whitaker. He's a political science professor at Hudson Valley Community College, and he's going to tell you all the info you need to know about voting. Professor Whitaker, thank you for joining me today.
Hi, Nolan. Thanks for having me, and it's great to be with you.
So tell people who may be on the fence, why should they vote, and what is the significance of voting?
Sure. Well, I mean, first of all, your vote is a way to make yourself heard. Voting is absolutely fundamental to democracy. If everyone stayed home and people didn't vote, then elected officials wouldn't be held accountable, and they wouldn't give much thought, I don't think, to the concerns of voters or the electorate possibly choosing someone else in the future. So, exercising your right to vote, I think, is fundamental to the way that we function as a society. It's a way for people to participate directly in politics. Of course, we're not a direct democracy like the ancient city-states of Athens in ancient Greece. We're a representative democracy. But democracy really requires the active involvement and the active engagement of the citizens. So I tend to think of it as, in some ways, our responsibility, one of our responsibilities in a democratic, small d democratic system of government. I would just add, too, that it's also a right that people have fought very strongly for over the years. The history of our country is one that shows that initially the right to vote, where it was extended, the right to vote was limited primarily to people who owned property, which in virtually all cases back at the time of the framing of the Constitution was white males. There were some very limited exceptions to that, but for the most part, ordinary people did not have much power to change their government through the ballot box. But over time, of course, we've amended the Constitution, and people have marched, and people have fought, and people have died to extend the right to vote. So I also think of it as a way to kind of honor that tradition and to remember the work, the hard work, the very hard work, and the sacrifices that people have made for many, many, many years to expand the right to vote into the way that we know it and understand it today.
Now, as stated earlier, many students are voting for the first time this year at Hudson Valley. What was your experience like voting for the first time?
Sure. Well, I was an undergrad student, and I was already really interested. I think when I was 17 or 18, I was really interested in current events, and I had some friends in high school, and we used to debate politics a lot, and even then, get into some pretty friendly but heated arguments about things, and we all had differing points of view. But I remember being really excited about the first election that I could vote in, which was actually a gubernatorial election. My first election was back in 1990, and so about 30 years ago. And I just remember feeling really excited. It was a great feeling, at least for me, to walk into a polling place and be handed a ballot and and have the right to go into a booth and mark the ballot and drop it into a box, knowing that it would be counted. It was great. It's such a great feeling. I think cast your first vote in a presidential election. So I hope that any of our students who are participating, in this election. Of course, this is the 2020 election. We're already talking about this as being a historic election in so many ways. So, you know. And I know that there are very strong feelings on both sides, but setting that aside for just a second, what a great time and a great feeling, I think, to be able to participate. And I hope that people will look back on it and say, wow, in 2020, that was the first time I got to participate and cast a vote and be part of this. Whichever side you come down on, if here in 2020, if this is your first election, we are, as a society, we're talking about the 2020 election being so historic in so many ways, so momentous. Whatever the outcome, a lot of people are talking about this as the biggest election in many, many, many years, and so. Regardless of how you feel about the outcome, I hope that students will look at this and will say, what an election to participate in, and what a great election to be able to first cast a ballot in and to vote for president. And I hope that people feel that way, regardless of whichever candidate they support.
Now, I understand this year is different in the sense that there are other ways to vote other than just voting at a polling place. Can you explain to people all the ways of voting this year?
Sure. Well, and I think that you just mentioned a really important point, because the COVID-19 pandemic. So earlier this year, as a result of the pandemic, the New York State Legislature enacted a number of changes to the election law that are designed to make voting easier for people, but also to help ensure that the people are protected when they go to vote, and they don't feel that they have to place themselves at risk in the pandemic just to cast a ballot. So a couple of the major changes that I can think of are that the state, for one, has made it much easier to request and obtain absentee ballots. In the past, to get it to vote absentee, you needed a specific reason. So you had to be in the military, overseas, or you had to be out of the county, and so the reasons really were limited to those things. What the state did this year was they added to those reasons, and they said you can request an absentee ballot if you are concerned about exposure to COVID-19 as a result of going to the polls. So that was probably one of the biggest change. And from what I understand, many people are choosing to receive absentee ballots under that particular provision. There are people who because of the pandemic, don't feel comfortable going to a physical polling place, especially since we expect the polling places to be quite crowded on election day. People don't want to wait in line. They're concerned about social distancing and other restrictions. And so being able to obtain an absentee ballot on the basis of concerns about COVID is probably the biggest change. The other change that kind of goes hand in hand with this is that the state has also opened up early voting beginning October 24th. So beginning October 24th and running through Election Day, and so people will be able to vote early at designated sites throughout the state, within each county, and so people can show up and at these designated sites, and they can vote there. And these early voting sites are also a place for people to turn in absentee ballots or vote by mail ballots. So if you requested an absentee ballot, it got mailed to you, and you want to fill it out, you can drop it in the mail. and return it to the Board of Elections, or you can bring it to an early voting site and you can submit it there. Or as the third option, if you wish, you can bring your absentee ballot to your polling place, to the polling place actually on election day up until the time the polls close at 9 o'clock on election night. So those are those are a few of the changes, and I would note that many other states have made similar kinds of changes, although in other states, not so much here in New York, but in other states. South Carolina for one, Alabama for another. Some of these efforts to expand access to voting, set up additional polling places, have been challenged in court, and so there are a number of ongoing court cases that involve some of these efforts, but not so much here in New York. We have not seen much in the way of court challenges to these kinds of efforts.
For those that do plan to vote in person, what do they need to know about voting at a polling place?
Sure. Well, it's a pretty straightforward process. I would say that the most important thing is to check to make sure that you are registered, and also that you are going to the polling place to which you have been assigned. That's very important. If you go to the wrong polling place, you won't appear in the registry, the book of registered voters at that polling place, and so that could complicate things a little bit. So I think knowing where your actual polling place is, how to get there, and maybe anticipating the possibility of waiting in line for some time. I've voted in a lot of elections over the years, and for the most part, even in presidential election years, most I've waited a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, but this time around we're expecting much higher voter turnout than in past years, and so I think anybody going to the polls on election day probably needs to prepare for the possibility of waiting some time in line. Of course, the polling places are open. They have long hours. I believe they open at 6 a.m. and close at 9 p.m. So you might consider going at an off time. I would say the busiest time in general tends to be shortly after people get out of work, so the late afternoon, 4:30, 5 o'clock, 5:30, 6, kind of in those hours. In the past, that was always the busy time. There might be a little bump around lunchtime as well, earlier in the day. But I think this time around, it's possible that the polling places could be busy for much of the time that they are open. So I think that's another thing to consider. And then for people who haven't, been through the process before, you walk in, you'll see a table, usually a couple tables of election workers, and they'll ask you to check in and ask you to state your name, and then they look your name up in the book of registered voters, and they'll ask you to sign the book. And the way that we verify the identity of a voter here in New York is that you sign your name into the book, but when you sign, your signature will already appear. There'll be an electronic kind of a scanned copy of it appearing in the book, and so the poll workers will match your signatures. We'll check to make sure that your signature matches what's in the book, and so that's how we verify the identity. And then you'll be handed a ballot, a kind of a large piece of paper and a marker, and you can go into a booth for privacy, and you can mark your ballot, usually filling in a little oval, kind of like the Scantron tests that you sometimes see at Hudson Valley. But you fill that in, and then when you're done filling out the ballot, and depending on where you live, it's going to be a different number of races. There could be anywhere from just a handful to a dozen or more. But as soon as you're done voting for all the candidates that you wish, then you take your paper ballot and you slide it into a sorting machine, and that machine will register and record your ballot. And at that point, you're done voting. And if you're lucky, they might hand you a sticker on the way out that says "I voted." And of course, you can slap that on your jacket or your shirt or your hat. But that's basically the way the process works. And then, of course, go home and wait for the results, which we may get that night or we may not get that night. We don't know yet.
Now, in addition to voting, what are some other things that students can do to become active in this election?
Sure. Well, there are any number of things that people can do, and it's a great question, and I get it a lot. And I always encourage my students. You live in a community, and there are people in government making decisions every day that directly impact your community, and any number of ways to get involved in this process. I think if you're interested in participating, in in this election cycle, you can always volunteer to work with a campaign, volunteer for a campaign. Political campaigns I think, are always looking for people to help them go door to door and hand out campaign materials. They're always looking for people to make phone calls, and especially now, those efforts campaigns are really in the home stretch because we're really in the final couple of weeks here, but campaigns are always looking for people to kind of help out with those tasks, and it's a great way to meet people. It's a great way to be involved and just feel like you're part of a bigger cause, and you can volunteer for pretty much any candidate that you want, anyone who's running. And in my experience, they are almost always looking for help, and they love to have college students come in and whatever time you can give and whatever you're willing to do to help. I think especially at this stage, they welcome somebody coming in and offering their time and just their willingness to be part of the effort. So there's that. But even outside of campaigns and outside of elections, I sometimes have students say to me that they're very interested in a particular cause or a particular issue, and I say that's great because we are right next to Albany, New York, and because Albany is a state capital, there are all kinds of organizations in Albany that are devoted to all kinds of different causes. Practically, any cause or any issue that you can think of, there's going to be an organization or an association devoted to that cause. So pick one that you're interested in and that you feel strongly about, and reach out to them. Give them a call or show up at their headquarters, and you can volunteer to help those organizations, just like you can volunteer to help a political campaign. And then I think, a third way that I think that we often overlook is just to be involved in what's going on in your own community. Consider going to, meetings of your city, your town government. You can go to your city council, or like if you live in Albany, they call it the Common Council, but the Common Council meets at least monthly, and those meetings are open to the public. And I think sometimes just by showing up and seeing what your elected officials are talking about and what issues they're dealing with, that's a great way to start to become involved. And at these meetings, they often have time set aside for public comment. So if there's an issue in your community that you feel strongly about and you want to share your opinion about, it's often as simple as going to one of these meetings and stepping up in front of a microphone and addressing the Common Council or your city council or your town board for a few minutes. If you prefer not to speak in public, and I know that many people prefer not to do that, even just a simple act of writing a letter, sending an email, calling one of your elected officials, just saying, hey, here's something I'm thinking about. Here's something that's on my mind. Those are all great ways to be involved. And to be involved as little or as much as you like.
And Election Day is November 3rd. I'll be there. I'm going to be a poll worker on that day. Professor Whitaker, thank you again for joining me today.
Oh, sure thing, Nolan. Yeah, happy to be a part of it, and thanks for putting this podcast together. I think it's what you and the Hudsonian are doing for our students is terrific, and it's a great effort. And I know that you guys work really hard to put this together, but I think it's terrific, and it's a wonderful service to the students. So thank you for doing it.
Well, thank you. And make sure to tune in next week when we talk to the head of student activities about how you can access basic services during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. See you then. To read more about the following stories, make sure to head over to thehudsonian.org for the latest on-campus news from the Hudsonian, and make sure to listen to new episodes of The HUD every Monday.